Hi, I'm Rick.
Hi, I'm Oscar. Rick, another Serverless September episode of Betatalks.
Yep.
Today we're going to talk about static web apps.
Right. So there's two things that are static webs. You have static web hosting in Azure Storage, which is the $web container that you can enable on a storage account, and then you can put some static files in there and it will host it on a domain or in a custom domain if you want to.
Yeah, they have been around for a few years.
Yep.
But this is new. This is the preview thing that is highly dependent on GitHub.
True. So let's dive right into the portal and see what we have there. So the first thing that stands out is if we go to all services and we're going to look for static web apps, we don't get anything. So apparently it's so previewed that it's not there yet, but if we do create a resource and we say I would like to have a static web app, then it's available here. Delivered by Microsoft, you can create a static web app. It's in preview, as we know. And if I click create, then there's a couple of things here that stand out. So first of all, you create a subscription, or you select a subscription, and of course a resource group. Then you do, for instance, Betatalks 001. You have a region. This queue now is always free because it's in preview.
Yeah, you also saw that the region list was very short, as we
yes.
recognize.
And then you have to sign in with GitHub. And that's because the Azure portal, or actually a worker from the Azure portal, does stuff in your GitHub repo to get stuff up and running.
Okay.
I've created one beforehand, so we're in here right now in the ASWA, or Azure Static Web Apps example. Azure Static Web App. And there's a couple of things here that are also standing out. So one of them is right here, the name of the application. It is delightful tree and then some number .azurestaticapps.net.
I would have assumed it was asvaexample.azurewebsites.net or something like that.
Yeah, I assumed that as well. However, the name of the static web app seems to be the name of a container of resources that together form your Azure Static Web App. But the URL is not the same as the name you give the Azure Static Web App.
Okay, that's just generated to be unique.
Yes, it's generated for you, and it can be all kinds of stuff. Now, the next thing that might be interesting here is configuration. So if you look into configuration, you can see a very clear environment selection for production. And here you can put some application settings if you want them. Now we can connect custom domains, so I connected aswa.rickvanderbos.net just to make it easier for people to find the demo if they want to look at it. And then one of the things that struck me as odd first time I saw this is here you can see the functions. Now first of all, you might want to take a step back and see what Azure Static Web Apps actually does. And then for that I'm going to the azure.com portal and zooming in a bit on this image. Azure Static Web Apps actually, as you said, integrates very tightly with GitHub. And what you can do is you can have a repo in GitHub. You can configure which branch you would like to monitor. Mostly that would be main or the older term master. And as soon as a push or pull request comes in, it goes into the repo, an Azure action, or sorry, a GitHub action is started. It builds what you did, and then it deploys it automatically into static web apps. And then there's two separate, let's say, parts of static web apps. And one is the static content, so HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and you can have TypeScript in there as well. That will compile in the GitHub action.
Yeah, but static content, no server-side logic, just plain hosting.
Yeah, correct. And then you have an API with Azure Functions. And you do not have to explicitly set the API with Azure Functions. You can use Azure Static Web Apps for static content only.
Okay.
So the Azure Functions part is optional.
Okay.
However, if you do specify it, that will also be built, published automatically by your GitHub action, put in place, and then your front end can talk to your back end. And that's what they're actually saying. It does a full stack deployment of everything you need to run a web application that has an API as a backend. Now there's a couple of things we need to know, and one of them is the Azure functions at this point can only be JavaScript or TypeScript.
Yeah.
And I would almost say, of course, TypeScript functions are just transpiled into JavaScript, so those are essentially the same. But you do have a static content part and an API part that consists of what your static web apps consist.
Okay, it's also all for now because it's preview. I'm assuming all kind of things come in, and we will definitely look into that when it's there.
Yes, we will.
But what it looks like, normally we create a resource in Azure, and we have like an entry point to deploy something to.
Yeah.
In this case, it's turned all around. You start in Azure, you specify your GitHub, it detects what's on there, and it creates everything in GitHub to deploy it there. But there's no way to, you don't have a deployment point. Like it has that action in there.
Well, in the end you do, because I think as far as I saw, it uses web deploy, and then this is just the Azure Static Apps.net URL that's generated for you, and then there's a web deploy available there also.
But it's all configured from a really, and maybe that's just a preview thing, but really happy flows. Like let's assume we have these cases with the functions without, just point it to there and we'll put it in there and that's it.
Yeah, and then one of the things that I ran into, because it is a preview and there's a couple of things that we ran into that weren't optimal. And one of the things that wasn't optimal as far as I'm concerned is I started out with just the front end. And I thought I'll add the API later. But in the current portal UI, there is no way of adding the API later. So what I had to do is I had to go to GitHub, to the repo that I connected to my static web app. I had to open up the GitHub action file and edit it so that it would also build my API and push it to Azure Static Web Apps.
So it is now, that's because it is a scaffolding with some choices. So if you change something, you really have to add it later.
And then you have to know what you're doing in GitHub Actions.
Yeah, well.
I mean, as soon as they start adding management of that here in the Azure portal, that would mean interpreting everything and anything somebody can think up that they add in their GitHub Actions. And I'm not really sure if that's what they want to do. So I'm not really entirely sure where this will be going. And one of the things that also struck me as a bit odd the first time I saw it is this is my overview of all of the functions that are behind the front end. Now there is a function available. We can see that one here, it's get values. And
that's it.
I cannot do anything else than click it and it gets highlighted.
And it also doesn't create a point that you can find in your normal functions tab that you can find these?
No, it's completely abstracted away, or at least it seems so. So I can't find a function app that this runs on, which also means I cannot go to the explicit logs that I have for one specific function, or do stuff about warm-up times, or I cannot do anything with the functions that are behind.
But it means it has, it's, at least for now, a really specific use case, which is lightweight setup of a site with some interactivity, because like pure static, we already had a solution. This goes a bit further. But for a lot of projects that you see on like GitHub, or that you would host your private site, or even company site. But
still, there is some stuff that this leverages that static website hosting and storage does not. For instance, HTTPS on a custom domain is not available by default on Azure Static Web Hosting in Azure Storage.
That would mean that you need to add like a layer on top of it.
You need to have Azure CDN in place and create the custom binding for there, then it works. But here you have a custom domain, as you see. So as I said, aswa.rickvandenbos.net, and I have it open and running somewhere. I think it's this one. And here you can see, if you look at the certificate, it's valid and it's from GeoTrust. So this is completely taken care of for me.
That's like the app certificate. So it's probably like half year or something and rotates automatically.
Yeah, and I don't do anything for that. So that just works. What's also really cool is that they have role management right here. I haven't played with this a lot yet, but what you can do is you can invite users explicitly to use your application. Then you can have authentication providers like GitHub, Facebook, Twitter, Google, which is all abstracted away for you. And then you can even have a role, I think it's a setting, it's called a setting, but you can specify that your application is not available for people not authenticated, or that certain parts of your application are only available if you're authenticated through a specific type of provider. So there's a lot abstracted away for you here as well. I don't want to dive into that one too much now, but one thing that I would like to dive into is the fact that here we have environment. Now, first of all, the staging that you see here, so the bottom environment, I think this is where a lot of power of Azure Static Web Apps is, because you have that GitHub repo and you specified the branch it needs to look at. Any and every pull request on that branch will automatically be built and deployed so you can see what's happening with your application.
Okay,
now,
but do you need, because it says staging, is it like slots you have normally, deployment slots? Do you need to create it first and connect it?
No, it does that automatically. So as soon as you create a pull request on your GitHub repo, it will automatically create a staging thing here, and then the title that we see here, which is styling update. If we go to our GitHub repo, which I think is this one, and then we have the ASWA example. As you can see, we have a pull request here, and we have a pull request which is called styling update, and that's automatically created as a environment in this Azure Static Web App in the portal. Now,
okay, so the use case is like we have something we want to change, create a branch, create a pull request, and by creating the pull request, not even having it reviewed yet, you can also already
see what's happening.
It kicks off a deployment to a specific spot, so you will see your changes.
Yeah, so if we go back to the Azure portal right now, we can see, if we go browse here, it would be nice if we saw that right away, but what it actually does is it takes that, in this case, delightful tree, blah, blah, Azure Static Apps.net, and then it post-fixes it with a dash and then the number of the pull request. Okay. So this is pull request 7, that's actually up and running right now. So the URL will be delightful tree, some number -7.Azure Static Web Apps, Azure Static Apps.net. Currently it's in preview, which means only one staging environment is available. But in the future, you will get one for every pull request that's open.
But will it now then, if you create another pull request on another branch, for instance, replace it, or
no,
it stays at this one?
As long as this one's open, it will stay there.
Okay.
Now the cool thing is, as I said, this is the application, aswa.rickvandenbos.net, but of course we also have that pull request open. So let's click this one, and then we can see that the styling update may not improve the application as we have it right now.
I would have some feedback on this pull request indeed.
Yeah, me too. So if we don't want to accept this, we'll go into the pull request, and I think it's this one. And let's say, I don't want this. This does not look good. Now, one of the things, we're seeing some pull requests that are closed and where the build failed. I would like to add that one as well, because again, this is something I think that we see because it's a preview feature. I was in the process of renaming all of my master branches to main branches, and I did so for this one as well. And I hadn't touched it since, but then earlier today when I wanted to create a pull request, I saw that the GitHub action actually didn't run. Or actually it ran, but it broke.
Listening to the new branch.
No, but yeah, but and then when it started listening to the new branch, because that was the first change I did, it broke. So as you can see here, there's some broken builds. And in the background, let's go to code and then workflow. And then we can go to the, as you can see, really nicely named Azure Static Web Apps, delightful tree, the number.yaml.
Yeah, so this is the GitHub action that it created for you.
And then what's also nice to see is that there's here a Microsoft GitHub user and myself as a contributor. But one of the things it does automatically for you is right here, it creates, or it has created a token that you can use to deploy your application to Azure.
Yeah.
And it tucked it away here in the Azure Static Web Apps API token. And if we go to, I think that's settings and then secrets. Here we can see there's the setting. But apparently in creating that setting, it took something of the name of the branch, or it took something in there, which meant that when I changed my master branch to be named main, and I also updated the build action, it broke.
Okay.
And I got the message, this token is not valid. So
That's interesting.
Yeah, but then I went into the Azure portal to start looking for a new key to generate.
Mm-hmm.
But under Static Web Apps, there's no key to be found.
This is like a deployment secret that you have to...
But in the Azure portal, currently I can't find it.
It's one of the things that's still hidden.
Yeah, it's not under Azure Active Directory either, so it's not a managed identity or something of sorts. So that's something of the things that we find. Okay, it's a feature, it's in preview, and there might be some hiccups here and there. In the end, it started working, so if I'm not mistaken, we killed that previous pull request. That was this horrendous guy. So I think that now the pull requests towards master are broken, and that's, by the way, also the name that I now, or the reason that I now also have a master branch here again, because that's when I created the Azure Static Web App to listen to master, and after I changed it, it broke. But that would mean, if I'm not mistaken, that if we go to environments right now, it's still there. It might be that it's not entirely closed down yet. But it will also automatically disappear as soon as the pull request was deleted.
Okay, you don't have to delete it yourself from here.
No, and I would have expected it to be done already, but it might be that there's some latency between it actually being closed on GitHub and...
Okay, and then if you create a new branch for another pull request, it just pops up here, and that's your
up here again.
Preview slot.
Yeah, so you can even not only see the title, but also the branch, and you can click through. So if I click on styling update, I will go to the actual pull request. See, it's still open, so I need to close this one. And then...
Oh, it was the other one.
Yeah, it was. It was. So if this one is closed, then it will automatically be deleted on the environments part. Is it this fast? Nope, not yet. No. But that's the magic of demos and having very small amounts of time to try and show stuff.
Okay.
But this is Azure Static Web Apps, and I think it's really powerful, but also I think it's really in preview. When was it released? Was it build?
I think around build, yeah.
For me, it feels like they wanted to get it out for build, and then they didn't quite get to refining it just yet.
No. This had a lot of pressure on it. I think they did at least to have something there that would show that there's something coming in this space, and enough to give some feedback on and to monitor what's going on there and how people will start using this. I think it's certainly interesting because you have a combination of like a spa website with some Azure functions, or fully static, fine. But if you want to use the functions, it turns more into a spa-like website probably. Yeah. Really interesting. I read that someone accidentally already unleashed some new features by just putting it in there, and it worked. And it said, well, documentation only says TypeScript, or what is it, JavaScript. Yep. But this is certainly moving, and I hope we will see more this month.
Yeah, I hope so too, but I'm not sure. By the way, we can now see the staging slot.
It emptied out in the end.
Emptied out since the pull request is now closed off definitively. I have a blog post on Static Web Apps available on my blog. I'll add that to the betabit.nl/serverless-september collection as soon as possible. Yeah, one last addition, by the way, is I'm going to go back to GitHub and then into the action just once again. Can I add it from here, by the way? I never know.
No, you could just go to the file.
Yeah, that's possibly something that they might be able to update in the future. Just so you guys know, right here are the most important pieces of information in your GitHub action build. So they have an app location and an API location, and the app location is actually where do you find the source code for the app based on the root of your repo. Yeah. So since I have an ASWA frontend and an ASWA API folder to separate them out, that's the location where the API and the app are. And then where is the app artifact, so the output of, for instance, your ng build. Yeah. And then in the documentation, in the official documentation, it states that running ng build -- prod is okay for you to build a Angular
That's the
application.
normal, like it also detected what's in there. It's like, oh, it's an Angular build.
Yes, but there was an issue because even the official documentation says run ng build -- prod. Mm-hmm. I did so, and I got the message that ng was an unknown command, because the Angular CLI needs to be installed on
the image
and not in the location. So it actually broke.
Then you need to run it from the binary folder normally.
Yeah.
So indeed, the npm run script is also something you see.
Yeah. So I created a build-prod that actually does.
By default, it didn't generate this code.
No, and that's one of the things that I had to dive into to make sure that this works. And in the end, you can do anything you would like in here because it's a GitHub action file, and you can do what you want it to do. But it's also good to know that, for instance, documentation isn't quite up to par with the Angular app yet. I created a pull request that's been open for a few weeks.
Okay.
But the guys working on it are also very busy doing Serverless September, for instance. Yeah. So, yeah, no harm there.
Okay. Now, really cool to see this stuff working. If I come across to a project where this helps, I would certainly look at it. Still in preview though, so don't use it for production.
I might have. I'm not saying.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
See you next time.
Thanks. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.